So I think this is it. I'm gonna make a review of my 2018 GTI today, because I think this might be one of the final days that I actually have this car. Or at least I'm closing in on the final month, and I'm gonna have to dismantle it because what I'm getting is also MQB and a lot of parts are gonna fit. It's gonna be sick, but this car is gonna be missed. And I spent the last five and a half years building it to my spec. You know, basically making it mine and putting myself into this. So to not document everything I've done, what I've thought of it, my iterations, and how the car is in what I would consider its final form, and probably the best form that a Mark 7 GTI could be. Not necessarily, you know, best form as in, you know, most balls to the walls, but the most reasonable price to performance. And on that topic, to introduce this car, this is a base model in Canada. So what this car came with originally was reflector headlights, LED tail lights, 17-inch wheels. It had the performance pack brakes for 2018. It has a CX-CB engine code, so that's the one that still took the old VW502 oil. And all it really had was proper CarPlay, a manual transmission, manual parking brake, that kind of thing. So I'll give you a walk around of the car right now. And you'll notice I have a few cosmetic modifications. So getting into the rear end, this GTI has genuine Volkswagen taillights with dynamic signals. It has the GTI TCR diffuser. Rear tints all around. Getting to the side of the car, you can see that TCR diffuser. Right now, the suspension setup it's on is pretty interesting. So I have Bilstein B16 coilovers. Right now they're set to be the softest they can be. But I also have done a lot of other things. So I have front and rear sway bars from H&R. I believe it's 28 millimeters and 26 millimeters. I can't remember which one's front and which one's rear. I have the coilovers, I mentioned those. I also have control arms with Superpro polyurethane bushings pressed in. My rear trailing arms also have Superpro polyurethane bushings. The front and rear subframes both have locking collar sets. And I have white line ball joints. And I think that's it for suspension. Maybe what I'll do is, I have it all spreadsheeted out, but I'll probably flash something up on the screen. So I took the suspension basically to the highest level without getting crazy, like, you know, $5,000 coilovers, that kind of thing. Because I think with a car like this, and for reference, this car cost me about 27,000 Canadian dollars, brand new when I bought it in 2018, plus freight and sales tax, of course. But I think like that's a reasonable suspension setup where it's not disgusting to have it on, you know, a $30,000 car. I will say, if you tally everything up, I'm probably at about $15,000 into this car, but a lot of it will come off, a lot of it I'll get my money out of. Looking at the front end, you can also see that I have a pretty sick diffuser. This is a GTI TCR diffuser. I imported it from Germany, actually Latvia, through a company called IACA, and it was pretty difficult to install because of the differences in splash guards, etc., but I got it done. I also have other cosmetic modifications like genuine Volkswagen black mirror caps. I have dynamic Osram smoked signals. So those are, you know, OEM manufactured dynamic signals, but, you know, aftermarket. So I call them semi-OEM plus. These are fake AliExpress headlights. That's the only China part I have put on this car. And the last thing to note too is I have the little Golf R wing on the rear. So that covers the exterior, and I believe all of the suspension of note. So I'm going to get into the engine, and then later we're going to drive it. So getting under the hood, I've done quite a bit on the engine side, but I wouldn't say it's, you know, anything balls to the walls. Just the list is kind of long. First thing, which is probably the last thing you'll expect, is I have a fluid amper crank pulley. This was supposed to make revving a bit nicer, engine run a bit smoother. I'd say it cut down on the clutch chatter a bit, but it wasn't crazy by any stretch of the imagination, and for the money it cost, it was kind of a scam. I have the Racingline R600 intake on too. This is the R600, I think, Evo. So it's actually a Mark 8 intake, and it fits, no problem. I really like this intake. Underneath this intake, I swapped out all my shifter bushings. So I did the Diesel Geek Super Pin. I did there's some sort of shim in the ball joint on the inside of the car. So I had to take out my entire center console. I also have a Forge short shift kit on. The bushings are all Diesel Geek. And I also have, there's mounts for, there's 3 mounts that go into the transmission that hold some of the shift cable guides. And I've also replaced those with aluminum bushings. So super stiff, the shifter. I have this stupid polyurethane hose for the air intake. This does nothing. I also have off a Seat this washer fluid nozzle. This fluid cap is off of an Audi R8. But now we get into some of the fun stuff. So I have a track slag 4-inch downpipe on the car. This is the second downpipe I've had. I think I've done the downpipe on this car close to 5 times between putting the stock downpipe on for inspection / to sell my last downpipe and then putting this new one on. This is the best downpipe for this car, hands down. They use a thicker steel, and the larger size, they advertise that it increases spool time. I'm pretty happy with my spool time, but it was difficult for me to tell because I only ran this on the IS20 for about 2,000 kilometers before I put on the IS38 turbo, which I'll talk about in a second. But this downpipe is awesome because the way it's shaped, I suppose it must be the size and diameter of the pipe, actually allows for the sound to be a lot better tuned. So when you're driving this car, there's a lot less drone. It sounds great. And this is pretty important in my opinion, because a lot of downpipes, they sound like crap when you're cruising on the highway. And to me, that ruins a car. I did a lot of long drives of about 3,000 kilometers in this car since I've owned it. And when I had a downpipe on that was, my previous downpipe was an Ultimate Racing downpipe. I had a 200 cell metal cat as well as a second resonator. So I ran the stock resonator, then the Ultimate Racing resonator, and I had a cat, plus the stock muffler. I also ran that with the GTI TCR muffler. I was really dissatisfied with that setup with the TCR muffler because it droned so bad. The TCR muffler is designed to be run with a GPF car, so there's a lot more emissions controls that cuts down on noise. And then plus with that downpipe, it just, after you hit about 105 kilometers an hour, it droned. It wasn't pleasant. Later, I put back on the stock muffler and it improved, but it still wasn't that great. So the problem wasn't really the TCR muffler, but it was the downpipe. And I guess with these cars, when you take out both those cats, you really open it up to a lot of drone. So with this downpipe in particular, like I said, there are a few features of it that it doesn't drone that much. So I can set cruise control at 135 kilometers an hour. Of course, I would never do that, but if you're in that range, it actually doesn't sound that bad. It's quiet, it sounds it sounds like almost a stock part. Obviously it's slightly louder, but only slightly louder. Similar to the difference between having a sound actor on versus having the sound actor off. This is a great downpipe. The next big modification that I have on this car, which it really changes the car, is the IS38 turbo. So earlier this year, I put on the IS38 turbo. It was an easy install to do. I'm not a mechanic. You know, most of my training is in the legal sphere or in programming. So I did that in my garage. It was no problem. But this downpipe, this turbo in particular, really changed the car. With the IS38 turbo, the car was really peppy in lower gears at lower RPMs. You'd be driving in the city and it was super duper fun, but it just died off in higher ranges. So you'd be driving and you'd be shifting and it would die off. Whereas the IS38 turbo, a lot of the power band shifts to after 3000 RPM. Whereas I feel like with the IS20, you know, it's hard to remember now. I'm sure I could recount it, but you know, between about the low 2000s and maybe mid 3500s, that's when you felt the real punch. So this turbo is a real treat on the track, where you have some straights, because you can hit insane speeds throughout the entire rev range, which saves on shifting, and it just really hauls. And with the lightness of the GTI, it's my opinion that it's faster than an R on a roll, and in practice it's probably faster than an R in most situations. Now, adding this turbo, even with my wheels, which have Continental, Extreme Contact Sport. So these are like supposed to be Pilot Sport 4S competitors. Even with these tires, 235s, I've also run it with Indy 500s that were 245s, and it still spins city. If you have traction control off, you can spin in fourth gear pretty easily. I'd say reliably, you probably spin until about third, because if you're shifting up to fourth, you're running out of road or you're on a really long drag strip, like an airstrip. So yeah, this turbo really changed the car. I run it with a Unitronic Stage 2 Plus tune. I've run a JB4 on this car, as well as Unitronic Stage 2 and Stage 2 Plus. I probably put about 20,000 kilometers on Stage 2 and maybe 10 to 15 on Stage 2 Plus. So I feel like I've gotten an idea of how the car is on those two tunes. And the JB4 was on for probably 30 to 40,000 kilometers. I have to say, the JB4 to the Stage 2, it wasn't a huge difference. It wasn't life-changing, especially when you compare it to the JB4 with a downpipe on. But the Stage 2 Plus, when you're really driving the car and pushing it, changed it quite a bit. It was a lot more mature driving around the city, because in low RPMs, like I said, you were in really, really good shape, where you weren't just getting that punch right away on this new turbo. So it was mature for daily driving, but then when you would open up the throttle, it was a different animal. It would be spinning the tires, you know, in perfect conditions with sport contact tires, to the point where I really wish I had run this car with 200 treadwear tires. And my next car, I probably will get those. But yeah, the IS38 turbo and the Unitronic Stage 2 Plus tune has been great. I will say though, the Unitronic tune has disappointed me in some regards. Unitronic's support is shit. You know, they are argumentative. They say they'll help you and then they drop off. Initially, I was getting EPC lights with this car, and I had to do a lot of troubleshooting. They wouldn't even give me advice on what spark plugs to run. And I know it's a contentious issue, but even just saying, you know, those should be fine, but this is not a binding recommendation, I think is expected, especially when you're spending like $1,300 on a tune and cable. So that to me was disappointing. But I have no check engine light from a catless downpipe. Oh yeah, and this downpipe is catless, so that's another big thing, where I went from 2 resonators and a cat to catless, and it was quieter. That blew me away. And it's all in the thickness of the steel, the shape, etc., etc. But yeah, Unitronic support was terrible, but I didn't want to check engine light from having no emissions control. So it was really the only option to me. And as a Canadian, wanted to support a Canadian company. They've always been regarded as fairly conservative. And at the time I was going for a tune, I was cognizant that, you know, EQT and any other Cobb tuner, they were getting emissions control put back on. APR no longer offered their higher stage tunes, and in my opinion, quite a few of them were half-baked. Integrated Engineering, in my opinion, was always half-baked. They put out a lot of features and had issues. And there were a few other tunes, like 034 I never felt was quite as dedicated to this platform. And finally, there were a few other tunes, like, you know, you'd have Eurodyne, even Revo, I think you could get on these cars. But, and obviously, you know, you could do Tunezilla, that kind of thing. But some of those were either too custom for me, because I wanted something fairly off the shelf, or they had downsides where felt like they didn't test it as much. Felt like, you know, they're kind of gimping it, giving you check engine lights for what I think a lot of people should, or typically will run, you know, either a lower grade cat or catless downpipe, that kind of thing. So that is it in terms of performance modifications, with the exception of motor mounts. So I have BFI Stage 1 motor and transmission mounts, and I have the full BFI transmission mount. You can't see it, it's covered by the battery box. But I have that, as well as a Power Flex insert. Previously I had the BFI Stage 1 dog bone insert, but it disintegrated on me. Those are great. I've really enjoyed them. The BFI motor mounts added a lot of engine noise and a decent amount of NVH, although I got used to it. Like at first in the cold, I would have said it was almost unbearable. It felt like I ruined the car. That's what I felt like. However, as time passed and they broke in and the weather got warmer, I actually don't notice them all that much anymore. The one thing I do notice is I can hear a lot more engine noise. It's almost like the sound actor is turned on in the car, but I can also hear a lot more clutch chatter. So that was the big downside to me, but the traction difference it made was immense. I would wheel hop so much on the stock motor mounts, and they weren't broken. They were in great condition. However, it just got to the point where with the car, I would, you know, I'd be losing a lot of traction. So I was leaving a lot on the table. And when I would take it to the track, that would kind of suck. So for me, it was huge to upgrade to those mounts. I could get a lot more traction in corners. That plus doing all those suspension modifications really allowed me to pull speed in corners. Like I can take tight corners at insane speeds, especially for a front wheel drive car. And since I mentioned it, I also do have a clutch on this car. I preemptively replaced the clutch with a Sachs Performance Stage 1 clutch. So the organic clutch, I believe it has no springs or maybe less like grooves on the clutch face, which is supposed to hold about 400 foot-pounds. That clutch is awesome. It really didn't feel much different than stock, and it's held up insane. I've abused it, or I shouldn't say abused, but I've used it to its max. I've got no slippage in 40,000 kilometers, and it feels natural. It's great in daily driving. I've driven this car downtown New York City. I've driven it downtown Toronto, and it's been excellent with the Stage 1 clutch. I haven't ever, you know, hated it. A few other things I have done to the clutch too is I have all the springs deleted. I have a BMS clutch stop to end the end point a little bit earlier. I've removed my swirl valve. I've replaced the clutch fluid. I haven't replaced the clutch hose, but I have replaced all the brake lines with stainless steel brake lines from ECS. But yeah, the clutch is great. I highly recommend that clutch. I think it's the only one I would get. And obviously I haven't had any issues with crank walk to this day. But since I mentioned brakes, I will also talk about my brakes. So I have GTI Club Sport S front rotors and Zimmermann rear rotors paired with Hawk HPS 5.0 brake pads. and I'm running MODDED 5.1 brake fluid with, again, ECS stainless steel red coated brake line. You can kind of see them there. Those brake lines, I would say, maybe made a marginal difference at best. The MODDED brake fluid feels just like stock, but I have abused the car quite a bit. I've taken it to the track and at Toronto Motorsport Park and AMP, and I would say it made a marginal difference. I could tell I got less brake fade. The Hawk HPS pads definitely had a lot less brake fade, but you can't get much more than, you know, six-ish, maybe 8 laps if you're lucky or you got caught up by someone else on the track with these brake pads. I haven't ever switched out brake pads for track use. I expect I'm going to change my philosophy on that soon. However, that's the deal with my brakes. So I've gone through brakes, I've gone through performance, I've gone through cosmetic, and so that's the car. There are a few other random modifications that I have on this vehicle, such as Audi jack points. I also have e-Golf livery underneath the exhaust to try and reduce the amount of salt that can get onto my exhaust and make it so that people can't see the fact that I don't have a catalytic converter. And there are a lot of other little random mods that I've gotten from Europe and whatnot. So yeah, this is the car. This is, I guess, my verbal review, and then maybe I'll take it on a bit of a drive just to get a bit of a point of view of how it behaves, how it sounds, that kind of thing. Again, I'm really trying to capture what this car is in its prime, because I have always loved this car, and it's a bit of a shame for me to get rid of it. But with that said, I'm getting a Mark 8 Golf R, so I'm really excited, and it's the last year of the manuals. So yeah, as you can see, I just want to show these dynamic turn signals off. Again, Osram on the actual mirrors, and these are AliExpress headlights. They've actually been decent headlights, and I think my refresh rate is kind of low on this recording, but all the LEDs have held up, and they look amazing. The only thing that kind of sucks is I did experience some failure of the clear coat, which is a bit of a shame. I should have put paint protection film on them and recognized the fact that they're, you know, cheap Chinese parts. They also don't fit the best. You can see here, the fitment is kind of poor on the front bumper. Part of that probably is because of the fact that these are replicas. So not all of the clips exactly line up, as you might see, as they would on stock headlights. You can also see, if you look up close, you can see like where the factory made this matte black. It's actually like kind of spray painted and poorly masked off. They're both projectors. I have Morimoto as my regular beams, so Morimoto LEDs, and I have just yellow Hella as my high beams. And those have held up well, although my first set of Morimotos, I think they were the LED like 1.0s. I'm on the 3.0s now. They lost an LED, and you can see the LED that fell off of the light bulb is actually in the headlight, which sucks. I'll go close up on the other headlight too, just so that people can see what you're getting with these cheapy headlights. Again, you can see kind of quality, so to speak. You can see how these black surfaces are masked off. You can see the clear coat that's come off. Showing off one of my favorite parts though are the real taillights. I have seen the fake taillights and I've helped friends install them, but these real ones are quite a bit different. The LEDs are just so much nicer. They're clean, they light up consistently, and the animation is amazing. And yes, you can code them in with a North American car. I use the 0815 wiring harness to accomplish this. And I'm really, really happy with it. The other thing too with these headlights is they are quote unquote European, so no orange side markers. Highly illegal. Or not highly illegal, but technically illegal. And another thing too I'll highlight too is you can see there's a bit of light bleed on the corners here, so, and you can see that fitting in. It's a shame because they're really, really nice, but it's the only option with a North American car, because the genuine ones are a very different wiring harness and very different coding. All right, so I think I've showed this off. I think I've captured it. So I'm gonna get in and take it for a drive. Also, this is a CarPlay dongle because I have the iPhone 15. But here you can see this is the interior. Super basic in a Canadian base model. You get a large touchscreen, dual zone climate control, heated seats, no push button start. You get cruise control, that kind of thing. You get traction control button and a mode button. And sport, on the Unitronic, I have the pops, so. And that's without my rear windows open, only the fronts. I love it. Let's do a little peel. This is quite a competent car. I'm going to get a little bit more situated and we'll take it on a little bit more of a drive. The pops are a little obnoxious, but luckily not custom. In any mode like eco or normal, you can get rid of them quite easily. So yeah, the vehicle is one that I would consider quite competent. The Bilstein B16 coils really ride well. Like, I have friends that get in my car and they cannot believe that I'm on coilovers. And I would tend to agree, like, these drive like you would expect a hardened stock car to drive. Like, they're competent, but not necessarily, you know, something that I would consider to be ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, they're really, really comfortable. And I think it was worth it having the adjustability because most of the time I run these on softness setting 10. it feels great on a daily basis, but if I ever hit the track, I can just pop them onto either, usually I go between 1 and 3 on the track, depending on how aggressively I'm driving, or if I'm gonna try and hit some back roads, that kind of thing, I might keep them on 5, which I find is balanced. But I get all the best of the worlds that I can on the same set of coilovers, and all I have to do to set them is stick my hand underneath the car. If I tilt the wheel right or left, I can adjust the front coilovers without jacking the car up, just sticking my hand underneath, maybe laying on my side. And the same with the rear. I don't even have to turn the wheels or anything in the rear. Obviously you can't, but you can just stick your hand under, no problem, and it's easy. You're not really struggling to do it. So I really, really love that about these coilovers. Things like the ball joints and the bushings, I really didn't notice they reduced the comfort in the car, but I did notice they improved the turn-in. Again, I'd say the worst thing I did in terms of this car's comfort was those BFI engine mounts. And I think it's because of the pliability of the pliability of the rubber, really, and the design of the motor mount. There's not a lot of well-designed motor mounts for this generation of car. There's like the CFE, I think, or CPE. Those are pretty interesting. There's the BFI, those are pretty interesting. There's like Revo. There's even like, there used to be Superpro ones, and there's a few other sets. But a lot of them either, like the Superpro aren't available anymore, but a lot of them just have big issues that make them quite a bit less attractive. But this car is comfortable. The IS38 also didn't really affect my fuel economy. Obviously, I'm punching it a lot more because it's so much fun. But if I drive it normally, like I should be, this car is actually really, really competent. Like, I mean it. It can get, I think I got as low as 6.1 liters per 100 kilometers with the Stage 2 Plus and catless downpipe. That to me is crazy. Obviously, those are good conditions. I always use either 91 or 93. Typically, I fill with 91 because that's all that's available. Shell 91. But yeah. I will also note, sound actor is completely off. But yeah, driving dynamics are great. IS20, I think I got a little bit better fuel economy. I'd probably say 10 to 15%, but again, more aggressive tune, different tune, that kind of deal. And with stock cat back and catless downpipe, it doesn't sound ridiculous. I'm not going to say it's quieter than stock, but it sounds good. Like, it's not obnoxious, it's nice cruising on the highway, and it's sporty. So I really, really love that. I'm going to take the car onto the highway just to get an idea of how it sounds. And I think I'm going to wrap that up, or this video up. I'd like to do a little bit more maybe on driving dynamics, but it's also difficult to articulate necessarily. So without, you know, being on a track, that kind of thing. And like an idiot, I deleted a lot of my track footage. cruising at what I'd consider normal speed, you know, about 110 kilometers an hour. I think that must be like 65 miles an hour. You can hear the car is competent. There are one or two small rattles in the car. I think one of them is actually my dash cam that's falling down. Another one is this stupid button on the e-brake. And probably my sunglasses. I have metal Ray-Ban Aviator sunglasses. But yeah, this car is competent on the highway. It has a lot of passing power. It doesn't shift or slip the clutch when you pass in 6th with the IS38, which is awesome. And I've done tons of drives in this car with the IS38. I was driving in pouring rain with these tires on, with the IS38 at, I would say, higher highway speeds, passing, etc. And this car was competent. It held its ground. It didn't squirrel or anything like that. I really, really love it. Trying to think about the other things to note. I've never tested acceleration in this car. Again, this gives you a sense of the road noise on the highway with all those modifications, the comfort level, what the interior looks like, that kind of thing. I really, really think that this is the sweet spot for any GTI. And that is this set of mods, this amount of money spent. I love this color. This color, white silver metallic, is one that polishes amazingly well. But yeah, so this is my car. This is my review. In terms, again, I guess getting into driving dynamics and daily livability. This car is great in the snow. It has the Haldex differential, and I have the Club Sport S tune, quote-unquote tune, because it's just a setting I did an OBD11 on it. It's very competent in the snow, especially with snow tires. It's competent in the rain. It's competent in the dry. It gets great gas mileage when you need it to. You can take it to the track and it's fun. I haven't had any serious issues with the car. The only issue I've ever had was once I got a code for the secondary air injection, but it went away after I unplugged and replugged the connector. It seemed like the locking pin wasn't down on it. And yeah, like that's been it. All I've done is oil changes. I've always been really happy with MQB cars. And other dynamics that I'll note, or other things to note, is I make all these statements with, especially in terms of the suspension, with the car on 19-inch wheels. So on 18s and 17s, it's so much more comfortable. So that's it. I'm gonna pause for a bit and come back. Maybe come back with some B-roll, and that'll be the end of the review.